Hi again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Around the Town with Chuck. My name is Chuck Guglielmo. It's a weekly interview show where we talk with interesting people around the community. And my guest today is Nurse Shannon Pike. Shannon, thanks for coming in.
Thank you. I'm glad you think I'm interesting.
You are interesting. Nurses are very interesting. And why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you led up to becoming a nurse.
Sure. So, again, my name is Shannon Pike. I am a resident of Ashtabula County for my whole life. So, I started out, when I graduated from high school and went to college, I pursued a degree in chemistry. I worked in industry for a couple of years and really found it not to be something that was my passion. There just wasn't enough interaction with people. So I didn't feel satisfied. My husband was in the military, in the Coast Guard, and so I went back to school to pursue my associate degree in nursing. And you know, I had always been interested in the medical profession, and so I went back and received my associate degree from Kent in Ashtabula in 2002. And I've been a practicing nurse ever since. My career has evolved from being a nurse at the bedside to supervision and management roles. My most recent position that I've been in for the last 6 months is the Director of Patient Experience role at Ashtabula County Medical Center. Prior to that, I've worked for the past 11 years prior to that at Conneaut. Mm-hmm. as an inpatient manager.
Mm-hmm. When did you first think that you wanted to be a nurse? How old were you?
To be honest with you, I would have to say probably from early childhood.
Wow.
And I really think that
and
comes...
you stuck with that.
I did. I should have stuck with it from the very beginning and not taken a different avenue. But I was a relatively sick child, so I was in and out of the hospital multiple times a year with pneumonia and asthma-related conditions. So I spent a lot of time in healthcare at an early age.
Mm-hmm. So. Did you know some others that were in nursing that influenced you?
I have to be honest. I think that probably the biggest influence to me as a child, as a patient, and then later on as an actual nurse was a nurse who recently retired from Conneaut, where she spent her whole career, and that was Sheila Dansereau. People in the community probably have Sheila as a household name if they were ever a patient at Conneaut back in the Brown Memorial days. So Sheila was a pediatric nurse primarily, and one of the things I just remember always feeling safe and always feeling well cared for when my parents couldn't be with me and she was working. I used to secretly hope that I would see her coming into my room when I was a patient as a child. And she really, I always remembered her, and then had the privilege of working with her for several years before she retired. So that was probably the biggest influence in my decision.
Mm-hmm. Very good. What was the transition like going from Conneaut to Ashtabula?
You know, I have to be honest. It was different in a lot of ways and similar in many ways. You know, the community is the community no matter where we are within it, and being able to serve the community in a nursing healthcare capacity is something that I really enjoy, and I think that we're very fortunate in this area to have so many options for care, and I'm really really just happy that I was able to make that transition to take on some new challenges in my career.
Mm-hmm. What about the role you play at ACMC versus UH? Is it the same? Mm-hmm. Is it anything different?
It's very different in some ways and similar in others. The difference is that I am not managing a direct patient care staff like I was at Conneaut, and there I was the manager of inpatient services. So I directly managed the staff of all of the inpatient units at Conneaut. As the Director of Patient Experience, I am more collaborating with existing managers and all of the staff to just create the culture that we're looking for to drive the patient experience.
Mm-hmm. Training had to be extensive to become a nurse. Talk about
Absolutely.
That training, how extensive that is.
So I started out getting my associate degree in nursing, And typically it's about a 2-year program. It's very intense. It could actually be more of a 3-year program depending upon prior classes and background. I was fortunate with my chemistry degree that I already had, a bachelor's in chemistry, that I was able to transfer in most of my prerequisite classes. So I focused over the 2 years on just the nursing classes and the clinical experience. I had to give up working for that 2 years. Toward the end, I was able to pick up a little part-time nursing assistant position, but it's very intense, and there are a lot of hours in the clinical setting, as well as working on your care planning and your assignments. There's a lot of reading and a lot of studying.
Oh, I can imagine. Now, do you do any training yourself with new girls coming in?
I do some training, and I have done some training. We did an intensive educational session for all of the nursing staff at ACMC back in July. It was a 1-hour seminar presentation about some of the core behaviors and processes that drive the patient experience. And it focused on best practices for nurses at the bedside.
My guest today is Shannon Pike, nurse at Ashtabula County Medical Center, nurse for a long time now. Shannon, what motivates you?
What motivates me? I would have to say, and this comes from years of experience now, but what motivates me is knowing and seeing and feeling that I've had a positive impact on a patient or a family member. There's really nothing better in your job than knowing that you helped somebody or made a difference, that you touched them in some way.
What is the greatest change you've seen in nursing over your career?
That's a really great question. I have to say that I'm one of the nurses that has had the privilege of understanding and practicing when nursing was mainly on paper, handwritten documentation, and also practiced at the bedside when we transitioned to electronic medical records. And so, that's a buzzword in healthcare: electronic health record, electronic medical record. Everything is essentially paperless now. Not 100%, but very different from when I started practicing and different from years ago. So I think that that's been a challenge, particularly for nurses like myself, nurses who are even older in their practice than I am, have been in the practice longer. Because when you get used to a specific system and then it changes, technology moves very quickly. So it's a huge change, a big challenge, not a bad one, just something that has to change the way that we practice.
Sure. And
definitely impacts our workflow.
What about the schedule for the nurse? Now, you work 12-hour shift?
I work Monday through Friday.
Also, you're 8 hours?
Yes. Or 10, or whatever the need is.
So you're on a vacation day today?
Oh no, I went in this morning and I'm headed back after this.
So you've taken time out to come?
I did.
Very nice. Didn't know you did that. What is the greatest challenge? Some other challenges for nursing today, would you say?
I think that the fast pace and the changes within healthcare overall, we've had to adapt in many ways to rapid changes in the basic landscape of healthcare. With the Accountable Care Act and Obamacare, there have been a lot of differences. There have been some regulatory changes, and things happen very quickly. So we have to always be on our toes, and we have to figure out how to incorporate those regulatory changes into the processes that we already have, so that we can still deliver the best quality care and the best patient experience.
Do you like to be independent on your job, or do you like working as part of a team?
Both. We cannot be successful in healthcare if we're not a team. We absolutely have to work together and rely on one another. There are of such a wide variety of roles within healthcare and within nursing. So, we have to be able to have each other's back for the sake of the patient's best interests, and communicate across all areas and with one another. So, you know, that's a great feeling to be part of a really good team, and also to be able to work in my role developing teams to achieve the goals that we need to achieve for patient experience.
Are there times where you feel that you need to work independently?
Oh, definitely.
What would those times be?
Those times are one, and I think this is probably true for all nurses. When you're looking at your own personal practice, you know, we can recognize our strengths and our weaknesses as individuals, and you know, when we're trying to improve upon something, I think that working independently to identify what we personally need to do is something that we do every day. And then we can incorporate what we need to do individually as part of team.
You mentioned strengths and weaknesses. That was going to be a question down the road.
Oh.
Well, I'll fit it in right now. What would you consider your strengths and weaknesses?
I would say that my strengths are, one, being able to interact with people and practice empathy. I think that's my biggest strength. I also think that
personality is one of your biggest strengths.
Oh, thank you.
I can tell.
I'm a good communicator, I feel. I recognize that it's an essential piece of working in healthcare. We have to make sure that we're very clear on what we need to do and make sure that the patient understands what's happening with their health. I think another strength of mine is being an advocate for patients and families. That's important, and it's something that nurses do all the time. And even though I'm not practicing at the bedside currently, and I haven't for a while, still being able to advocate for what needs to happen for the best interest of the patient is a strength that I have, and I hope that I always maintain. Weaknesses. We always have a hard time with our weaknesses. But I think that for me, one of the weaknesses that I have, and I've always had, both in my personal life and in my work life, and that's patience. I have a strong desire to make sure that things are done correctly, thoroughly,
on
time, and well. And so sometimes I'm not as patient as I could be, because everyone doesn't function the same way as I do. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. It's been a journey for me throughout my career. I've learned a lot about myself and others by working on that, but that's definitely one of my weaknesses.
What do you find difficult about being a nurse?
What do I find difficult
Or
about?
if somebody wants to, let's say somebody that wants to come into nursing, what would you tell them that could be difficult? Not to discourage them,
Yeah.
but what do you find difficult, and what would you tell somebody?
Well, I think that one thing that, a couple things that come immediately to mind. One is that we really have to remember that when we enter into this profession, we have to focus on our relationship with ourselves and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. We're not great at it across the profession of nursing. We are really great fixers for other people, but we don't always want to fix ourselves because we are pretty selfless for the most part. And so that's a real challenge to try to make sure that we're taking good care of ourselves, because we have to be in a good position personally to be able to take care of others. So that's definitely one. And I would say the other is really knowing that being a nurse and being in the medical field is a huge responsibility. We are responsible for observing and assessing and caring for patients. We spend the most time with them when we're at the bedside than any other of the medical professions. And so it's a huge responsibility. So it's not something to take lightly. You really have to feel the calling to serve others and accept that responsibility before you take on the role of a nurse, or really any healthcare profession.
Are you a nurse for multiple doctors, or do you have a certain doctor?
Actually, no. I work across the health system with all of the managers, nurse managers, all of the other managers of other ancillary departments, and all of the physicians.
How do you, what I would find difficult, how do you relate to a person, one of your patients who constantly is complaining about pain? How do you handle that situation like that?
Really, two things. And it's actually pretty simple. Listen. Not just listen, but you have to listen to hear. You have to hear their story. Everybody has a story, and everybody wants to be heard. So you listen to hear, and you advocate for sure. And then you have to practice with empathy, and that really means hearing their story and walking in their shoes. And when you have the ability to do that, then you have the ability to help them and make them comfortable and do for them what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. And your patients can be of any age, I mean, from kids to adults?
Yes. Birth to 100 plus.
What about a family who complains about medical care? Do you deal with that at all?
Absolutely. I actually work very closely with our ombudsman, who mainly handles those situations, but it's certainly within my realm, and I like to think of, whoever I encounter and whatever their issue is or their compliment is, it is not outside of my scope to do whatever I can in that moment for that patient or that family. So to be very honest with you, a lot of times the root of all of the issues is communication.
That would be the biggest complaint you hear?
Well, it may not be the biggest complaint, but that's the biggest reason why there's frustration or dissatisfaction, because there hasn't been consistent communication across all areas. And a lot of times, those are the opportunities that we can really identify and fix, because you can just gather up all the key players and get the communication started.
Very good. What about your stress level on the job? Do you take your stress level home, or do you not have stress on the job? I'm sure you do.
I do have stress. If you can find a nurse or a healthcare worker that doesn't, I want to meet them, because I want to know their secret.
Really?
But no, I absolutely have stress on the job. And I will say that in my current role, my stress is different than it was when I was managing on the inpatient side, just by the nature of the difference in my role and what I do. How do I manage it? I don't take it home. I learned a long time ago that you have to find a way to leave work at work, because that's part of taking care of yourself, is leaving work at work and being able to go home and spend time with your family and do the things that satisfy you and make you a whole person. So it's not always easy, and I can't say that I do it 100% of the time, but I try. But one of the biggest stressors for me is wanting the experience for every patient to be excellent, and not having the control of making that happen myself 100% of the time. So really trying to identify and find ways to help everyone else in their role make that happen for the patient. So
Shannon, do you ever get called in after hours?
In my current role, not so much, but there's always that potential for any of us in healthcare.
Can you describe a difficult experience and how you handled it?
Why, sure. There's probably many. But thinking back to some of my early experiences at the bedside, I would say that when I had a patient that I was advocating for, and I knew that what needed to be done wasn't getting done, or wasn't getting done within the time frame that it needed to happen, that can be a little daunting for a newer nurse. And I spent a lot of my time at the bedside on the night shift. So there's less people available to you during those hours. And so it was sometimes difficult but necessary to have to continue to try to contact a physician, to advocate for the patient and get what they needed, and to have to really lay it out there, pretty sternly sometimes, and just say, listen, I need this. This has to happen. And you may have heard this, but sometimes as nurses we feel something in our gut, so to speak. You get a gut feeling that something's not right. You may not have the clinical data to support it, but you know that there's just something not right with the patient. There's been a change that you can't quite put your finger on, but there's something that's not right. Mm-hmm. That can be difficult because you're advocating for them, you're asking for intervention from the physician, but you don't have the clinical data to support it. But 9 out of 10 times you're right. So that can be a little difficult. How do you handle it? You just persevere.
With all this experience you have, how do you take that home as being a nurse for your own family?
That's an interesting question. Sometimes it's hard to manage not so much my immediate family, but friends or extended family. I think that there's a lot of people that think that because I'm a nurse, I actually have the right answer, and the truth is I don't. I can make recommendations. I can give you some thoughts on what I think might be going on with a particular set of symptoms, but I'm a nurse, not a physician or an advanced practice nurse that can actually diagnose. So that can be frustrating sometimes because I want to help, but I don't always have all the answers. Mm-hmm. So I try and I give my best advice.
You get a lot of requests from the family?
I'll get, occasionally, hey, what do you think about this? Or they'll send a picture and do you think this is broken? I wish I knew. I mean, you can kind of gauge from time to time after you've had experience, but the truth of the matter is no one patient's presentation is the same. So without being present to actually physically view a patient or a family member, it's hard to say.
But you would know enough to let somebody know if you need to see a doctor.
Oh, for sure. Mm-hmm. So I do try. It's just a little different when it's your family, because you wanna be right, but you can't say for sure, and they want you to. They want you to give them the answer that they want, or they want you to give an answer that will solve it, and you can't always.
Mm-hmm. Let's close with this, Shannon, because I can see that you're very passionate about your job. What would you say you're most passionate about?
I'm most passionate about people, the patients, the families, about making sure that they have the experience that they deserve. And one thing in healthcare today, patients are becoming much more knowledgeable about their options, and about their ability to choose where they seek their care, and they know what kinds of questions to ask. Not always, but much more than in the past. So I really, really want to be a voice for them, and create the kind of culture that gives them the best possible experience and care.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon. This
You're
was very
welcome.
good, especially for taking part of your day, work day, and being with us
Sure.
Around the Town with Chuck.
I appreciate the invitation.
Shannon Pike, nurse, longtime nurse, now at Ashtabula County Medical Center, my guest today on Around the Town with Chuck. Have a good day.